I sat in the car outside the lawyer's office for a full 15 minutes before I worked up the courage to open the door. The engine was off, but I hadn't taken the keys out of the ignition. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel like it might give me some kind of answer if I just held tight enough. I wasn't even sure I should be there. "Why are you doing this to yourself, Ellie?" I whispered. "You know how it's going to be." No one invited me. No one called to say when the will would be read. I found out because my cousin Danny accidentally left me on the group message about where to park. Even then, I wasn't listed by name. The text just said, "Reminder, tomorrow at 10. Don't forget, Dad wanted everyone there." Everyone. Funny word that. I wondered if they meant me. I hadn't been part of everyone for years. Not really. Ever since Mom passed, the family had splintered into familiar cliques. My brother Richard with his booming voice and six-figure salary, my sister Olivia with her Pinterest-perfect family and those irritating group selfies, the cousins who all stayed local, the aunts who held court like royalty, and then me. I lived an hour away, worked full-time, didn't post much, didn't stir drama, quiet, steady, invisible. Even during Dad's final months, I wasn't included in the hospital group texts. I got updates secondhand, from the nurses mostly, when I'd show up on my own. Once, I asked Olivia why I hadn't been told about a change in his medication. She laughed and said, "Oh, we figured you'd be too busy with work to come." I wasn't too busy. I just wasn't seen, and yet I came anyway. I showed up in the middle of the night with fresh pajamas when he had an accident. I brought applesauce, books, blankets. I combed his hair back when he was too tired to move. I sat in silence when he didn't want to talk, and talked gently when he did. But none of that was posted online. None of it counted. I sighed and reached into the glove compartment for a tissue. My eyes were burning, but I refused to cry before I even got inside. This wasn't about inheritance. I wasn't here for a payout. The truth was, I didn't expect a gift. I just wanted closure. Even if they ignored me, even if they laughed, even if no one remembered my name, I wanted to hear it all. Hear what he left behind, what his final wishes were. I wanted to know what mattered to him in the end. I wanted to be in the room when his life was wrapped into a folder and signed away. Because I loved him. And even if he never said it out loud in front of the others, I think maybe, just maybe, he loved me too. So I took a deep breath. I got out of the car, and I walked through the doors. The waiting room of Franklin and Cole Legal Services was painfully quiet. There was an artificial plant in the corner, already shedding plastic leaves. A coffee station no one had touched. A few leather chairs with indentations from long waits. And then, them, my family. I saw them all at once. Richard, leaning back with his arms slung casually over the chair. Olivia, scrolling on her phone, immaculate as always. My cousin Danny whispering something behind her hand to our Aunt Gail, both of them chuckling. Olivia looked up first. "Oh, you made it," she said, voice flat with surprise. I gave a small nod. "Yeah. I did no traffic?" Danny asked, with that smug little tilt of her head. "Nope," I replied, not bothering to smile. They didn't move to greet me. No one stood up. Instead, Richard gestured vaguely to the corner of the room. "There's a chair over there," he said. "Or maybe just sit at the back? I think Mr. Cole prefers us up front." "Of course," I murmured, walking past them. There was one empty chair in the far corner, right next to the ficus with the peeling leaves. It wobbled when I sat in it. No cushion, no table nearby. I folded my hands in my lap and stared ahead. The room buzzed with quiet laughter and side comments as the lawyer entered. Mr. Cole was an older man in a crisp navy suit. His voice had that deliberate cadence only lawyers and funeral directors seem to master. Measured, calm, final. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Cole said. "We're here today to carry out the final wishes of Mr. Leonard Vaughn." That name hit me in the chest. Leonard Vaughn, not Dad, not your father. Just a man being reduced to paper and property. Mr. Cole opened the folder slowly, like the words inside might leak out if he rushed. As he began reading through the formalities, I glanced around the room. Danny was already nudging Olivia. They exchanged a look. Olivia mouthed something like, "vacation fund." Richard tapped something on his phone. I imagined it was a note about stocks or shares, or maybe a yacht he was already fantasizing about. And me? I sat quietly, not expecting anything, not hoping, just listening. I could feel the heat rising in my face, not from shame, but from distance, from the sting of being there without really being there. But I stayed. Because even if they saved me the worst chair in the room, I still had the right to sit in it, and if nothing else, I would carry this memory with me, not the property, not the heirlooms, just the sound of his name being spoken, one last time. I closed my eyes briefly. I'm here, Dad, I thought. Even if no one else sees me, I'm here. I didn't know then that the chair I'd been given, the worst one, the forgotten one, would become the seat of something far greater. But that moment, it was just silence, just waiting, and just me, alone, again. The waiting room smelled like old paper and stronger cologne. I stood there for a moment, uncertain, before one of my cousins finally looked up from her phone. "Oh, you made it," said Leanne, with a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The others didn't even turn around. I'd thought maybe, just maybe, this would be a moment where things felt different, where grief softened the sharper edges. But grief, in my family, only seemed to harden them, make everyone a little more territorial, a little more smug. The lawyer's office had one long oval table. Most of the family had already claimed their seats, laughing, sipping water, whispering things I wasn't invited to hear. I hovered near the door, unsure where to go. Uncle Todd waved vaguely toward the back. "There's a chair there." The folding chair, the metal one, the one that squeaked when I sat and scraped loudly when I tried to adjust it. I took it without a word and pulled it to the end of the table, where the overhead light buzzed and flickered like it wasn't sure it belonged either. No one scooted closer. No one offered to trade. The lawyer came in, older, stiff in his posture, thick glasses perched halfway down his nose. He shuffled some papers, clearing his throat. A hush fell over the room, but it wasn't reverent. It was anticipatory. Everyone was ready to get what they thought they'd earned. "Before we begin," the lawyer said, "let me first say Mr. Grayson was very specific in his instructions." My brother, Nate, leaned back in his seat like he was about to be crowned. Leanne whispered to her sister, "I bet he left me the beach house. I always said I'd take care of it." Uncle Todd muttered, "Let's hope he didn't leave it to the cat." They all laughed. I didn't. I just sat quietly in my little chair, hands clasped in my lap. They were joking about what they'd spend the money on: cars, renovations, vacations. Nate actually said, "I might finally build that home gym. Dad would have loved that." My name wasn't mentioned, not even once. I looked at the floor. The rug beneath the table had a floral pattern, faded and fraying at the edges. I focused on that, anything to distract from the way my cheeks were burning. Because it wasn't the chair that hurt me. It was the confirmation. Confirmation that even now, even here, I didn't belong in their idea of the family. I wasn't a rival. I wasn't a threat. I wasn't anything. The lawyer began reading, but his voice sounded muffled to me. Like I was underwater. Or seated behind glass. I could see their faces, their smirks, their greedy little twitches every time a property or account was mentioned. But I wasn't part of the equation. I wasn't part of the performance. When my father had been dying, I'd asked if I should come to the hospital. Leanne told me it was too crowded already. Nate said, "You know how he doesn't like too much fuss." But here they were now, fussing plenty. I watched as the names were called, to Nathaniel Grayson, to Leanne Walters, to Todd and Carol. One by one, the assets were distributed like party favors. Every announcement felt like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I hadn't been allowed to write. It wasn't that I wanted money, it was that I wanted to matter. Even just a little. As the lawyer continued, someone across the table unwrapped a mint with an exaggerated crinkle. Another cousin stifled a yawn. Someone reached for the water pitcher and didn't bother asking if I wanted any. That's when I noticed the silence. My own, stretched too long. I hadn't said a single word since I arrived. I thought about speaking, asking a question, anything. But I didn't. Because the silence wasn't just theirs anymore. It was mine too. And somehow, in that moment, sitting in a wobbly folding chair while my family divided up a legacy, I realized something. They might have forgotten me and their plans. But I had never forgotten how they made me feel. They always say that when someone passes, your mind plays tricks, floods you with good memories, and sandblasts the bad ones until they're blurry, rounded at the edges. But I remember both. And I remember them clearly. My father wasn't cruel. He wasn't cold. He just didn't look at me the way he looked at the others. He looked at Nate with pride. Chest-puffed, handshake firm kind of pride. Nate, who played varsity everything, who once sold lemonade and called it market research. Dad called him the future. Gave him a check to launch his first startup out of college. Bought him a watch when he landed his first deal. That watch alone was worth more than I made in a year at the time. He looked at Leanne like she was delicate, precious. His little songbird, he used to say. She'd call him when she had a flat tire, and he'd drive across the city to change it himself, even when he was limping from his second knee surgery. Me? He looked at me like I was nice, helpful, useful. I don't remember ever hearing "I'm proud of you" in front of anyone else, maybe in private. Maybe whispered on one of those nights I made him tea and sat with him when his hands trembled too much to hold the cup. But not in the bright light of day, not when it counted. I remember once, just once, when I brought home a regional writing award in high school. I was 16. I walked through the front door, holding the little plaque like it was a passport, proof I belonged somewhere. Dad glanced up from the paper. "What's that?" he asked. "I won," I said. "Short story contest, out of the whole district." He nodded, smiled faintly. "That's nice, sweetheart." Then the garage door opened, and Nate walked in with his gym bag, shouting something about making playoffs. Dad stood, clapped him on the back. The plaque never made it out of my hand. I tucked it in the closet that night. It's still there, I think. I didn't compete for attention after that. I just disappeared into the edges. Learned how to listen, how to offer help before it was asked. I became the one who made sure there were batteries in the flashlights, extra towels in the guest room, ginger ale in the fridge when someone was sick. No one ever asked how it got there. They just assumed it always would be. Years later, when Dad got sick, I didn't get the official calls. No one said, "Can you come?" or "We need you." It was always an afterthought. A line passed along through cousins or an email sent 2 days late. But I went anyway. I showed up, quietly, without fuss. When Leanne cried too hard to be in the room, I stayed. When Nate said he couldn't see him like this, I brought a new set of flannel sheets. When no one remembered to label the medication organizer, I sat at the kitchen table and did it myself. I wasn't the one who made speeches or shared throwback pictures on Facebook. I was the one who carried the soup upstairs when his knees couldn't take the steps anymore. And the thing is, I never expected applause for it. But I think I expected something. Some tiny proof that being there mattered more than being loud. Once, on one of the quiet nights, he'd just come home from a hospital stay. He looked at me as I refilled his water and said, "You're a good girl." That's all. 5 words. But the way he said it, I clung to that, tucked it in my chest like a note folded small. That was the kind of love I got. Not a will, not a toast, just fragments. I used to tell myself it was okay, that maybe I just wasn't the kind of daughter people remembered, not in photos, not in stories, not in legacies. But I was the one who knew how he liked his toast, barely browned, butter all the way to the edges. I knew which pillowcase he hated because it felt like sandpaper. I knew he liked silence more than small talk, that he read the obituaries first because he wanted to know who was finished. None of that shows up in estate documents. But it was real. It happened. I happened. I guess I just didn't think it counted. Not really. Not against the loud kind of love, the kind that throws parties and gets written into trusts. So when I sat there, at the will reading, in that awful squeaky chair, I wasn't surprised that my name hadn't come up. Not yet. I was prepared for that. It was the same silence I'd been handed my whole life. Only this time, I was starting to wonder if it said more about them than it did about me. The clock on the lawyer's wall ticked louder than it had any right to. Even the air in that office seemed judgmental, stale and heavy, like it had absorbed generations of entitlement. My cousins had arranged themselves like royalty at a coronation. Elbows on armrests, legs crossed with intention, jewelry polished. One of them even brought a notebook, probably to keep track of who got what, just in case someone needed reminding later. I sat at the edge of my chair, not because I was eager, because it barely supported my weight. The will reading began with formality. Full name, date. A few gentle words about legacy and intention. Then the list began. To Nathaniel James, I leave the remainder of my business shares. Nate straightened in his seat. Of course, that was always going to be his. To Leanne Marie, I leave the lake house in Vermont and the sum of... Leanne let out a tiny, rehearsed gasp, the kind people give when they already know the gift but want to look surprised. To my nephew Alan and my niece Ruth. More items, more dollars, more nods exchanged across the table. It was as if I weren't there at all. No one looked my way. No one paused to check if I was still breathing. Maybe they assumed there was nothing left to give. Maybe they were right. The lawyer turned the page, and then he did it. He cleared his throat, not a casual cough, not a filler noise. It was intentional, like punctuation, like the moment before something shifted. He looked directly at me. To Margaret Elaine, he said. The room froze. Someone's pen stopped mid-scratch. A bracelet clinked against a glass. Even the air changed. It was the first time I'd heard my full name in that room. The first time it didn't come from my own mouth. I blinked, sat straighter. The lawyer reached under the table and pulled out a thick envelope. He held it in both hands, then walked it to me himself. Per Mr. Halbrook's specific request, the lawyer said, this is for your eyes only. He didn't hand it to my brother, or my sister, or the executor. He handed it to me. Just me. I opened it slowly. My hands shook and I hated that they did. But I couldn't help it. Inside was a single sheet of legal paper. At the top, deed of transfer. Below it, property address, 1342 Wren Hollow Lane, the family home. The one we all grew up in. The one my father refused to sell, even when his knees gave out and the roof needed repairs. The one with the peeling paint and the creaky stairs. The one I used to visit every Sunday, even when he barely spoke anymore. My fingers brushed the embossed seal at the bottom of the page. I read the note tucked beside it. For the one who stayed. That's all it said. 6 words, that's all I needed. No one else in the room spoke. Not immediately. I could feel the heat of their stares. The quiet confusion turning into disbelief, and then the disbelief slowly morphing into something sour. Alan was the first to break. He leaned toward the lawyer and asked, Is that the house? The main house? The lawyer nodded. Yes. Ruth narrowed her eyes. The whole thing? Correct, the lawyer said. Fully paid off. All utilities and property taxes settled for the next 3 years. Your father made those arrangements in advance. Leanne scoffed. But she didn't even... Then she stopped herself. Didn't even what? Didn't even matter? Didn't even ask? I kept my eyes on the paper. Not out of triumph, but out of disbelief. Because I had spent so long accepting scraps that it didn't feel real to be handed something whole. They whispered among themselves, quick glances, tensed jaws. But I didn't speak. Because what was there to say? They had counted me out, again and again. And somehow, without announcing it, without flaunting it, without asking anyone for approval, my father had made a final decision. And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about walls or rooms or how many zeros were attached to the property value. It was about being seen, not pitied, not tolerated, seen, for everything that didn't make it into holiday cards, for the visits, the quiet caregiving, the patience that stretched across months and years. It wasn't cash, it wasn't jewelry, it was roots, and roots don't shout, they hold. The lawyer didn't elaborate, he didn't need to. The room had already started to tilt. My brother's jaw flexed as he stared at the paper in my hands. Leanne blinked like she was waiting for someone to explain. And Ruth, who always managed to speak in italics, finally said what they were all thinking. Ruth said, "There must be some mistake." The lawyer didn't even look up from the file, he simply replied, "There isn't." "But the house," Leanne said, pointing to the envelope like it might catch fire. "That's the estate. It's the central asset. Why would he?" She stopped herself, and maybe, for the first time in her life, realized there were answers she didn't deserve. I didn't say anything. I just laid the envelope flat across my lap and let my hand rest on it. The deed was real. The signature was real. And the note, 6 small words tucked into the folds, was real. For the one who stayed. Not the one who posted about him on Father's Day. Not the one who signed checks from across the country. Not the one who sent flowers but never came. For the one who brewed the tea. Adjusted the thermostat. Read the fine print on his prescriptions. Who sat with him on the porch when his hands shook too badly to hold the railing. Me. It was always me. Alan said, "Dad never said anything about this, not to me." The lawyer finally looked up. Calm, unshaken. He left it in writing. Leanne snapped, "But what about equity? What about fairness?" He closed the folder. "Your father had full legal authority to distribute his assets as he saw fit. This deed was signed, notarized, and filed 2 years ago. You were all notified of the will's execution date. You're welcome to seek independent counsel, but the transfer is binding." And just like that, it was done. The laughter from earlier, the smug jokes, the whispered predictions, they vanished into the silence. I don't know what they expected me to do. Cry, apologize, offer to split it. Instead, I breathed. Not a triumphant sigh. Not a sharp exhale of gloating, just release. Because it was the first time I wasn't clinging to air, hoping for acknowledgement that never came. Alan turned toward me, trying to sound diplomatic. "Look, maybe we can talk. Maybe we figure out something that works for all of us." I said, "There's nothing to figure out, Alan." He blinked. "You're really going to keep it?" I nodded. "I'm going to restore it." Ruth scoffed. "You don't even have the resources for that." I tilted my head. "You sure about that?" Because what none of them knew, what they never bothered to ask, was that while they were building flashy lives in other states, I had quietly saved, paid off debt, worked 2 jobs, skipped vacations, built credit. I'd been preparing to buy something modest. Now I didn't have to. Because my father had already made the down payment, in trust, in memory, in recognition of something they had all refused to see, that you don't have to be loud to be worthy. The meeting wrapped, slowly, sluggishly, like everyone's limbs were heavier than before. They filed out one by one. Some gave curt nods, some didn't look back. Leanne paused by the door. I didn't know he cared that much," she said. I answered, "You weren't supposed to. It wasn't for show." I waited until the room was empty to stand. My hand gripped the envelope like it might dissolve if I let go. The lawyer came over, not with legal jargon, just kindness. He said, "He talked about you, you know. A lot more than you'd think." I looked at him, surprised. "He said you reminded him of his mother," the lawyer continued. "Said you were quiet, but you noticed everything. That you never needed praise, you just needed to be trusted. I swallowed hard. My throat felt thick. Then he added, "This wasn't a gift." It was a decision. I nodded. It felt like one. Outside, the sun had started to dip. That amber light that makes even the sidewalks look soft. I didn't rush. I just stood for a while on the curb, envelope in hand, letting the moment settle into my bones. I had walked into that building invisible, and walked out holding the very thing they all assumed would be theirs. But it wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice. It was something gentler. It was proof that sometimes love remembers in silence. And I didn't fight. I didn't gloat. I just exhaled. It didn't take long. 3 days after the will reading, I got my first text. It was from Ruth. A simple message, like we were best friends out of nowhere. "Hey, crazy week, huh? Can we chat about the house?" I stared at the screen, then locked my phone. An hour later, a call from Alan, straight to voicemail. "Hey, I know things were a bit tense, but maybe we can figure something out. You know Dad would have wanted us to stay united. Let's talk." It wasn't surprising, just expected. Because to them, the house wasn't memory. It wasn't warmth or legacy. It was property, footage, potential, a marketable asset. To me, it was the smell of Dad's aftershave in the hall, the creak on the third step, the pencil marks on the pantry wall where he used to measure my height. They saw square footage. I saw forgiveness nailed into the beams. By the weekend, I had a spreadsheet of offers, some subtle, some bold. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years now had opinions on liquidation and mutual family benefit. Ruth even emailed a contract proposal. "Just in case you decide it's too much work." I didn't answer most of them. When I did, I was short, kind, final. To Alan, I replied, "The house isn't for sale." He texted back, "But we grew up there. It's everyone's memory." I wrote, "Yes, but not everyone stayed." That was the end of that conversation. I didn't delay. The following Monday, I walked up the cracked stone path and slid my new key into the old brass lock. It stuck a little. Always had. Inside, it smelled like dust and something older. Not decay, just the kind of stillness that waits for footsteps. The curtains hadn't been drawn in months. The walls were faded in places. The kitchen faucet dripped. It was beautiful. I started small. Day 1, cleaned out the living room. Found an old photo behind the bookshelf. Me and Dad on the front porch, both holding lemonade. I didn't remember it being taken. But there we were, me in his old fishing hat, him with a crooked smile like he'd just told a bad joke. Day 2, scrubbed the floors, sorted through drawers, laughed at a can of beans from 1998, sat on the floor and cried when I found his glasses case tucked into the couch cushions. Somewhere between sweeping the entryway and patching the wallpaper, I realized I wasn't fixing the house. I was learning it. Room by room, I listened. The walls whispered their stories, and I answered with paint, care, silence. I didn't rush the work. I didn't hire it all out. Instead, I patched the screen door myself, sanded the banister, stood in the backyard, and watched the morning sun hit the oak tree in just the right way, like it was showing me how to start again. One morning, while I was repainting the baseboards in the upstairs hall, the doorbell rang. It was Leanne. She stood there holding a tray of croissants and 2 lattes, like a peace offering wrapped in paper cups. "Hey," she said, glancing past me into the foyer. "Wow, you've really started working on it." I nodded. "Yep." She stepped forward. "Mind if I come in?" I paused, then opened the door. She didn't sit, just wandered from room to room, sipping her drink, her eyebrows arched in evaluation. "It's so weird seeing it like this," she said. "Brings back a lot." I said nothing. She turned. "You know, I always thought this house would be Alan's, or maybe Mom would sell it eventually. None of us imagined." Her voice trailed off. I said, "Neither did I." She gave a little laugh. "Right, well, listen. I talked to a friend of mine who does real estate. He said with the market right now, this place could go for 7 figures? Easy? I raised an eyebrow. And maybe it makes more sense to cash out. You could get a fresh start somewhere else. Something new, not full of ghosts. I walked over to the mantel, picked up the photograph I'd found, held it gently. I don't want a fresh start, I said. I want this one. She shifted. So you're really keeping it? I'm living in it. Leanne looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't. She just nodded, set the tray on the hallway table, and said, "Well, I hope you know what you're doing." I smiled. I do. She left without finishing her coffee. By the end of the month, the calls stopped. People realized I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't emotionally overwhelmed or confused. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was rebuilding something that mattered. And every nail I drove in, every hinge I tightened, felt like reclaiming not just space, but identity. This wasn't just a house. It was proof that someone had seen me, that quiet love still counts. That presence, not volume, leaves the real legacy. They called it old. I called it ours. They called it a burden. I called it a beginning. And when I finally stood at the top of the staircase, fresh paint behind me, windows open to a summer breeze, I felt something I hadn't in years, not triumph. Peace. Because they thought I inherited a building. But what I really inherited was the reason he left it to me. The morning light came in soft. It filtered through the east-facing windows, casting long golden beams across the old hardwood floor, touching everything like a quiet blessing. The house was silent, but not empty. I padded down the hall in bare feet, the floor cool beneath me. I'd gotten used to the creaks now. I knew which step near the kitchen groaned just a little louder. I stopped trying to fix them. Some things aren't meant to be silenced. The air smelled like fresh coffee and pine. I'd placed lavender sachets in the closets just yesterday, the way Dad used to in Mom's drawers when he thought no one was looking. I passed the front room, now freshly painted and filled with light. The armchair was exactly where I remembered it from childhood, though the fabric had been replaced. The bookshelf stood tall again, no longer leaning from decades of neglect. It was a good house. It had been good to him. And now, it was good to me. That morning, I decided to go through one last box. It had been sitting in the attic, untouched, unbothered, marked with a piece of blue tape and my name written in his slanted, unmistakable handwriting. For her. That was all it said, not my name, just her. Like he didn't need to write it, like he knew only I would ever open it. I carried it downstairs slowly, each step landing with the weight of memory. Set it gently on the dining table. Peeled back the tape, lifted the flaps. It was full of paper, letters, drawings, a birthday card I'd made him when I was 8, folded lopsided and still glitter-glued. There were envelopes I'd mailed him from college, some unopened, some read so many times the creases had worn through. At the very bottom was a small leather folder. Inside it, a photo, me and him. We were sitting on the back porch. He was reading a book, and I was leaning against his shoulder, sketchbook in hand. Neither of us looked at the camera. We didn't need to. The moment was quiet, undisturbed. And in that captured stillness, I saw something I hadn't realized I'd been aching for. Proof. Proof that we had our own kind of love. That he saw me, even when others didn't. That he knew what I gave. Quietly, constantly, without keeping score. I turned the photo over. There was something written on the back. In his messy, familiar scrawl. She doesn't need to shout. She just is. I stood in the center of the living room. The sun had moved slightly now, casting a beam straight across the mantel. I picked up the photo and walked toward it. There, above the fireplace, hung a row of carefully arranged frames. Some were new, restorations. Others were older, polished by hand. I took down one small painting, made room, and placed the photo in the center. I stepped back, looked at it, and smiled. He didn't leave me riches. He didn't leave me stock portfolios or flashy heirlooms. He left my presence, memory, the truth of being chosen, even if it wasn't loud. A few days later, I received another letter. This one from the lawyer's office. Nothing dramatic, just final paperwork, ownership transfers, documents I'd already signed. But tucked inside was a final note. Something he'd asked the lawyer to include after everything was settled. It was handwritten. If you're reading this, then you already know. I didn't give you the house out of guilt. I gave it to you because you understood what a home is, and you never asked for anything except to be seen. So here's me saying it, finally. I saw you. Always. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just closed the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, next to his glasses case. People still ask why I never sold it. They say it must be lonely in a big house like this, that it's too much upkeep, that I could move somewhere more modern. I smile, say I like the quiet, which is true. But the real reason? Because this house holds the kind of love that never had to explain itself. It's in the floorboards, the doorknobs, the sun-drenched corner of the upstairs bedroom where I used to read as a girl. He didn't always say the words, but he left them everywhere. I hosted Thanksgiving here that year. For the first time, the others came to me. They brought food, questions, stories. No one asked if I was ready to sell. No one brought offers. They sat in the living room beneath that photo of me and Dad. Some glanced up at it. A few lingered longer. No one commented. But I saw something shift, not in them, in me. I no longer needed to defend my place in this family. I didn't have to justify the deed, the legacy, or the silence, because I had everything I needed. And now, every morning, I walk through these rooms like they're chapters of a book I get to live inside. I open the curtains, let the sun in, brew coffee, water the potted violets by the front door. I touch the frame on the mantel gently, whisper, "Morning, Dad." He never needed to say it in front of them, because in the end, he didn't leave me behind. He just waited until the noise died down, so I could hear it clearly. They thought I was the last choice. Turns out I was the only one who didn't have to ask.